During the bloodiest, most fanatical phase of the French Revolution, how evil did you have to be devoured by the very guillotine you created? It's a question for the architect of the Reign of Terror, and it ultimately points to one name, Maximilien Robespierre. He was once the revolution's purest saint, a man revered as the Incorruptible. Yet, it was this same man who dragged the revolution into its deepest, bloodiest abyss, becoming so despised that even the revolutionaries who built the system with him turned on him. Today, on Beneath the Surface, we'll explore how he ended up on the guillotine he used to execute countless others without a trial. In the Paris of 1793, the air was a thick cocktail of fresh bread, sour wine, and the metallic tang of death. The new French Republic was an infant struggling in its crib, surrounded by enemies, determined to smother it. Abroad, the monarchs of Europe had formed a coalition, their armies massing on the French border like a storm cloud. At home, a bloody royalist rebellion raged in the Vendée region, while the streets of Paris roiled with starving citizens, radical militants known as the sans-culottes, and conspiracy theories that spread faster than fire. Every breath the Republic took felt like it could be its last. It was from this fertile ground of chaos that the Jacobins rose to seize control of France. They were the revolution's most fervent believers and its most ruthless enforcers. To save the Republic, they created the Committee of Public Safety, a 12-man council that wielded nearly absolute dictatorial power. They could pass laws, command armies, and arrest anyone they labeled an enemy of the people. And on this committee, one man's voice began to drown out all the others, a lawyer from Arras named Maximilien Robespierre. Robespierre was no born tyrant. As a young man, he was a disciple of Enlightenment thinkers like Rousseau, a sincere believer in virtue and reason. He was a slight, meticulously dressed man who wore a pair of green-tinted spectacles and carried himself with an almost unnerving seriousness. He had no taste for money or women, living an ascetic life that made him a stark anomaly in the corrupt world of the old regime. This earned him his famous nickname, the Incorruptible. Early in the Revolution, he was known for championing the abolition of the death penalty and universal suffrage. But as the tides of revolution grew violent, as foreign armies and domestic conspiracies threatened the ideal republic he envisioned, his convictions began to warp. He arrived at a chilling conclusion: to build a republic of virtue, he would have to use terror to eradicate all its enemies. He wasn't alone. He was surrounded by a corps of devoted allies. There was Louis-Antoine de Saint-Just, the strikingly handsome archangel of death, whose pronouncements were as cold and sharp as his features. And there was Georges Danton, a wheelchair-bound lawyer who pushed through the terror's deadliest laws with unshakable resolve. Together, these three men formed the Iron Triangle at the heart of the Reign of Terror. Terror, Robespierre declared from the floor of the National Convention, is nothing but justice, prompt, severe, and inflexible. It is therefore an emanation of virtue. Under the banner of this idea, France descended into a state-sponsored purge. In September 1793, the law of suspects was passed, casting a net wide enough to catch nearly anyone. If you were suspected of royalist sympathies, deemed unenthusiastic about the revolution, or simply carried yourself with the air of the old world, you could be arrested. Trials became a farce. Defendants were given almost no chance to speak. Every morning, the rumble of the tumbrils, the death carts, filled the streets of Paris, hauling a fresh batch of criminals to the Place de la Révolution, home of the nation's new symbol, the guillotine. This humane killing machine, perfected by Dr. Guillotine, became the altar of the new France. The Sanson family, executioners for generations, had never been busier. Each drop of the blade was met with a sick cheer from the crowd. Women known as the tricoteuses sat at the foot of the scaffold, knitting casually as the heads rolled. From King Louis's escaped and Queen Marie Antoinette to the revolution's own early leaders, along with thousands of ordinary people, life after life ended right there. But the true horror of Robespierre's terror wasn't just that it targeted the old guard. It was that it began to cannibalize the revolution itself. Like a great serpent, after consuming its external enemies, it turned to feed on its own body. The revolutionary camp was fractured. To the far left were the Hébertists, extreme radicals who controlled the Paris city government. They pushed for more violence, more atheism, even converting the Notre Dame Cathedral into a temple of reason. They were the voice of the furious street mobs, demanding death to all the rich. Robespierre loathed their chaotic energy and their vulgarity, seeing them as a threat that would drag the revolution into anarchy. To the right were the indulgents, led by the charismatic Georges Danton. Danton was a giant of the early revolution, a man whose booming voice had once inspired the storming of the Bastille. But after years of bloodshed, he and his allies, like the journalist Camille Desmoulins, had grown weary. They argued that the terror had served its purpose. It was time for mercy, for a return to normalcy. They called for a committee of clemency to end the killing. For Robespierre and his inner circle, both factions were traitors. The Hébertists were radicals, the indulgents, compromisers. In his mind, there was only one true path for the revolution, and any deviation, left or right, was a crime. He decided to destroy them both. The purge began in March 1794. Hébert and his followers were rounded up, charged with the convenient crime of being part of a foreign plot. They were railroaded through the Revolutionary Tribunal and sent to the guillotine. It's said that Hébert, a man who had called for so much death, wept uncontrollably on his way to the scaffold. The Parisian crowd watched, unmoved. Yesterday's heroes were today's traitors. Just 2 weeks later, Robespierre moved against Danton. This was a political earthquake. Danton was a revolutionary icon. Many believed he was untouchable. His friends begged him to flee, but Danton was arrogant. They wouldn't dare. Can a man carry his country on the soles of his shoes? They dared. On the night of March 30th, Danton and Desmoulins were arrested. Robespierre himself wrote the indictment, a vicious screed filled with wild accusations of corruption and treason, which Saint-Just delivered to the convention in a monotone voice. The hall was silent with fear. No one spoke up for Danton. The trial was pure theater. Danton, with his back against the wall, was magnificent. His booming voice filled the courtroom as he tore into the charges, his powerful defense captivating the audience and shaking the jury. Panicked, the court president sent a message to the Committee of Public Safety, which promptly passed a new decree: any prisoner who insulted the court would be silenced. Just like that, Danton's voice was taken from him. On April 5, 1794, Georges Danton and his allies rode the tumbril to their deaths. He remained defiant to the end. As the cart passed Robespierre's house, he bellowed a prophecy: "Maximilien, you will follow me." His last words were to the executioner: "Show my head to the people. It is well worth seeing." Danton's death marked a critical turning point. If executing the Hébertists was cutting out the revolution's cancer, executing the Dantonists was cutting out its heart. Robespierre had eliminated all organized opposition. His power was absolute. But he had also signed his own death warrant. In the National Convention, deputies from the political center, known as the Plain, now understood a terrifying truth: no one was safe. Robespierre's standard of virtue was so impossibly high, so arbitrary, that anyone could fail it. A stray comment, a perceived lack of enthusiasm, could get you killed. Fear began to rot the revolutionary government from the inside out. With his rivals gone, Robespierre set out to build his Republic of Virtue. He knew terror wasn't enough. He needed to give the revolution a soul, a deist. He despised both Catholicism and the atheism of the Hébertists. His solution was to create a new state religion, the cult of the Supreme Being. On June 8, 1794, he orchestrated a massive festival in Paris. Dressed in a sky-blue coat and carrying a bundle of wheat and flowers, Robespierre led the ceremony like a high priest. He delivered a sermon and lit a pyre, burning an effigy of atheism to reveal a statue of wisdom within. He then led a solemn procession to the Champ de Mars. The festival was meant to unify the nation. Instead, it alienated everyone. His colleagues watched his pontificating with disgust and alarm. They no longer saw a leader. They saw a would-be dictator, a man who wanted to be not just a master, but a god. "He is not satisfied with being in charge," one deputy muttered. "He wants to be God." Even on the Committee of Public Safety, his fellow hardliners began to fear his growing personal power. Robespierre sensed their hostility. His response was not to compromise, but to double down. 2 days after the festival, on June 10th, he pushed through the infamous Law of 22 Prayer. This law turned the terror into an assembly line of death. It stripped defendants of the right to a lawyer and eliminated the preliminary hearing. Any kind of evidence, material or moral, was admissible. And worst of all, there were now only 2 possible verdicts: acquittal or death. The law also removed the immunity of convention deputies, meaning Robespierre could now send any of them to their deaths on a whim. This kicked off the Great Terror. For the next month, the guillotine never stopped. Dozens were executed every day. The prisons overflowed. Paris was paralyzed by a silent, suffocating fear. But this final frenzy of killing backfired completely. It didn't eliminate Robespierre's enemies, it created more. Every deputy in the convention now felt the chill of the blade on his own neck. They knew Robespierre's list of traitors would never be finished. The infighting on the Committee of Public Safety exploded into the open. Meanwhile, a secret coalition formed against Robespierre. A mix of corrupt officials who feared he would purge them next and cunning operators who sensed the shifting tide. They began to quietly organize, spreading their fear of Robespierre through the halls of government. Robespierre retreated, disappearing from public life for weeks. He grew more paranoid, cocooning himself in his ideals. He didn't realize he was giving his enemies exactly what they needed. On July 26, 1794, 8 Thermidor in the revolutionary calendar, Robespierre returned to the convention. He delivered a rambling 2-hour speech, full of threats and self-pity. He claimed there was a conspiracy of traitors working against him. He named a few, but when the deputies demanded he name the rest, he refused. It was a fatal mistake. By leaving the threat nameless, he made every man in the room a potential target. In that moment, fear conquered everything. That night, the conspirators worked frantically. They knew it was either him or them. The next day, 9 Thermidor, was the day it all came crashing down. Saint-Just tried to speak in Robespierre's defense, but he was immediately shouted down. A deputy named Tallien brandished a dagger, vowing to kill the new tyrant himself. The chamber erupted. The deputies, so long silenced by fear, found their voices all at once. Every time Robespierre tried to speak, a roar of "Down with the tyrant" drowned him out. The president of the convention, one of the conspirators, refused to let him be heard. Robespierre stumbled through the chamber, pleading for help, but former allies turned away. His voice grew hoarse until a deputy sneered, "The blood of Danton chokes you." The words broke him. He collapsed into his seat. Finally, a motion was made for his arrest. The vote was nearly unanimous. Robespierre, his brother Augustin, Saint-Just, Couthon, and the head of the National Guard were all taken into custody. "The Republic is finished," Robespierre declared as he was led away. "The brigades have won." But the fight wasn't over. The Paris Commune, still loyal to Robespierre, staged a rescue. They freed him and his allies and brought them to the Hôtel de Ville, the city hall. For a few tense hours, it seemed a civil war would erupt. But at the decisive moment, Robespierre hesitated. Instead of leading an assault on the convention, he got lost in legal paperwork. The convention, however, acted swiftly. They declared Robespierre and his followers outlaws, meaning they could be killed on sight. They gathered their forces and marched on the city hall. Around 2 a.m., their soldiers stormed the building. In the chaos, Robespierre's brother jumped out a window. Couthon was thrown down a flight of stairs. Saint-Just surrendered without a fight. Robespierre himself was found on the floor, his jaw shattered by a pistol shot. Whether from his own hand or a soldier's, no one knows for sure. The great orator, the man who had shaped a nation with his words, was now silenced forever. The next afternoon, 10 Thermidor, Robespierre, and 21 of his followers were taken to the guillotine. There was no trial. As the death cart passed his old apartment, a woman splashed a bucket of animal blood on his door. The crowd roared its approval, just as they had for Danton. On the scaffold, the executioner ripped the bandage from Robespierre's broken jaw. He let out a final, agonizing scream. Then the blade fell. When his head was held up, The crowd cheered for a long, long time. They were celebrating the end of the terror, their freedom from the man who had tried to build a utopia on a foundation of corpses. The Fall of Robespierre is a story of perfect, tragic irony. He wasn't simply a monster. He was an idealist who believed to the very end that he was fighting for a better world. He tried to use terror to purify a nation and death to forge virtue, but his tragedy was that his own rigid, inhuman standard of virtue ultimately condemned him. His terror was so absolute it destroyed all trust, all loyalty. In turning on his own comrades, he destroyed his own foundation of power. With the law of 22 Prairial, he made the threat of death universal. And in doing so, he made everyone his enemy. To save their own lives, even his fellow Jacobins had to use the bloody logic of the system he had created to bring him down. We can't dismiss Robespierre as a simple madman. He was a product of his time, the embodiment of revolutionary logic. Taken to its terrifying conclusion, his life and death are a testament to a chilling truth. When an ideal becomes so pure that it has no room for humanity, it becomes the most savage form of tyranny. He didn't fall because he wasn't revolutionary enough. He fell because he was too revolutionary, so much so that the revolution itself could no longer survive him. He became the final, most famous victim on the altar he had built. These complex and dark chapters of the past are exactly the kinds of stories we are committed to telling here on Beneath the Surface. If you believe that understanding the forces that drive such historical events is essential, then be sure to subscribe to our channel. Click the notification bell so you never miss our next deep dive into the most compelling and often disturbing corners of human history.